Hello there, Johannes Whiskey Lore, and time for another whiskey tasting. Today we are headed to the western side of Scotland to a newer distillery, a distillery that you may or may not have heard of before, a distillery whose box you may or may not recognize on the shelf. They don't do a whole lot of, a lot of these distilleries are going to like white boxes with big bold letters on them. Still nice little subtlety here. It's got its own kind of feel to it. This is Ardnamurchan, and Ardnamurchan is a distillery that I have had the pleasure of going to, and it was a tough distillery to plan out because when I decided to go a couple years ago, unfortunately the ferry at Corran was out, which is the ferry that will get you from Fort William over across onto the peninsula without having to take this big long drive around. And unfortunately I had to take the big long drive around, and it was hair-raising because it was all single track roads and I was following a trailer for most of it, and he kept bouncing on and off the road and I wasn't sure what was going to happen. Plus, if you've ever been on a single track road, if you have a big long vehicle ahead of you like that, it really complicates things because now you're having to watch for these passing places where that thing is going to pull off to the left to let cars by, and then you may or may not have enough room to be able to get over also to help these other cars out. It really complicates things. So that ferry is back, which is great. It's not a big long ferry. It just goes right across a very thin area of water, but it is critical if you don't want to waste a lot of time getting over to enjoy a trip to Ardnamurchan. The peninsula itself is beautiful, but you're going to stay on single track roads for most of it. And when you're doing that, it's a little hair-raising. I will say that what I found was that driving it at night was actually I drove in really early in the morning. I found it a little easier to get through in the morning because if it's dark still, people got their headlights on. As you're starting to come to a curve, which there's a lot of, you can kind of see people coming from the other direction. I actually did that trip with two other distilleries on the same day. It was a tough day because I had to try to drive a lot of distance to get to all three and rely on ferries. So I went to Tobermory, that is on the Isle of Mull. I went to Nicknean, which is an organic distillery that is out on its own little jet off a peninsula. And then Ardnamurchan, which you got to drive way around to get back to. Now, this was something that I pulled off, but I will tell you that it's not easy to do. It's easier to do now. And the reason it's easier to do now is because now there's a ferry that goes between Tobermory and the Ardnamurchan Peninsula. So now you can do a circle. I checked it out on the map. It says probably about 4.5 hours. Some of that is ferry time, waiting for the ferry to get across onto the Isle of Mull. And then, of course, you're going to have the ferry coming across from Mull over to Ardnamurchan. So it'll be tough to time out, but if you wanted to try to do it, it's definitely a lot easier these days than it was in the past. Just be careful in terms of driving on those single track roads because it is a bit of an adventure, but I would not trade my visit there for staying somewhere else on the main area of Scotland. That was definitely worth heading out there, and the whiskey is a big reason why it was worth heading out there. I did not know what I was in for. I'd heard people talk about Ardnamurchan and say that their whiskey is good, you should check it out. I got out there, got to do the tour. Everybody was really nice. When I got in and we started doing the tasting, they wanted to know, what are you thinking of this? This is the difference between going into a distillery that's been there for 150 years, 200 years versus one that's been there for 10 years and is just now starting to get its whiskeys known throughout the market. So I was really pleased with it. It was a great trip. The whiskey itself I enjoyed, but I had not bought a bottle of it because on that trip I was going to so many different places, and this was towards the beginning of my trip, and I didn't know how much I was going to be able to carry back with me. So I did not buy a bottle. I got back here to the States, couldn't find it initially. Well, it was in my store here in South Carolina, believe it or not, because we don't get much of selection here in South Carolina in terms of scotches. It was here, so, and I was shocked. It was like $65 to $70 a bottle, and I didn't know that it would be down in that range. So definitely worth picking up, especially if you are a fan of peat, because what's cool about this, you'll notice if you look at the bottle, it has a QR code on it. They use the blockchain. They basically track all that goes on with your whiskey before it hits the bottle. So it tells you how long fermentation was. It tells you who was standing by while it was fermenting. It tells you who did the distilling of the whiskey, who put it in the bottle. And this was bottled in 2013 in January. It was distilled in 2016. And then it gave me a rundown of all the whiskeys that made its way into my bottle. So very interesting information. Also told me where the barley came from. And what shocked me is that the barley came from Fife. Now, Fife is north of Edinburgh. I'm used to a lot of grain coming from, say, the Black Isles north of Inverness. But this is actually coming from north of Edinburgh up right around where Lindores Abbey is in Fife. So interesting that it would be coming from the North Sea side rather than coming from, well, that'd still be North Sea. What am I talking about? Just northern North Sea down to, okay. Anyway, I'll get my geography straight here shortly. So what does this nose and taste like? What I love about this whiskey is that it is, if you're an Islay fan, if you're a Talisker fan, I think you're going to find this to be right up your alley. Now, this is a blend of 50% peated and unpeated whiskey. So it's maybe tamed down a little bit, but it's not tamed down that much. I mean, it's a nice campfire smoke. It brings a really nice nutty almond kind of a note, and that mixed with kind of a sweet vanilla on top of that, just kind of infused with the smoke. So it creates kind of its own little scent. And then I want to say it's like an apricot peach kind of a note that I'm getting out of this, and it's very forward. So it's not something where you kind of have to find it. It is right out front. It is very nice, and they aged the whiskey right there on site, so it's probably picking up some of that maritime quality as well, because I get a little of that. I dare say it reminds me more of maybe a Talisker pumped up a little bit. In other words, when I have Talisker, sometimes it's that sea and light peat that kind of draws my attention. This one, the fruit is really kind of standing out to me a little bit more. So it makes for a really, and it's just got this nice, as I say, kind of like a sweet vanilla on top of that. And this is done with, as I understand it, 65% bourbon barrel, ex-bourbon barrel, and 35% mix of PX and Oloroso. I'm not exactly sure where the Oloroso and PX are coming in, because I don't get a lot of those kind of sherry notes on this, but I don't mind. I don't mind. Cheers. The thing about this whiskey is that on the palate, it's much more of the almond, smoke, and peat. Those dominate. The fruit kind of goes to the background on it. You're left with that nuttiness. It makes you salivate. I mean, it's got a nice milky kind of character that shows up towards the end. I think the reason, this would be a strange analogy, but when you're watching like if you're a batter in a baseball game and you get somebody who is a fastball pitcher and that ball doesn't really leave the plane, everything is naturally going to drop. But if you throw that pitch and and the pitcher is throwing really hard and your brain says it should be coming down, it actually looks like the thing is lifting up to the batter because their brain is going, that's not supposed to do that. So even though it's staying somewhat level. And so this is kind of doing the same thing. It's like you start to sense when it hits the palate that it's not a heavy-bodied whiskey. But because the body lingers into the finish, it actually kind of coats your tongue, and it then feels like it's even more pronounced than it was before. So when I say milky on the finish, it's not really milky when it first hits the palate, but for some reason it kind of stays there and lingers. And I have to tell you that it reminds me of powdered French toast with almonds on the finish. That is what the flavor, it's like the powdered sugar kind of note coming through. It's not sickly sweet. It's just a really nice sweetness along with that nutty character that just stays on the palate. You would think that the smoke is what was going to stay with you, but actually I think I get a little bit more of that almond character coming through on the finish. Have you guys tried this before? What do you think? Does it sound like something that's up your alley? Well, I'm going to be doing more new whiskey videos coming up. Whiskey Wednesdays will continue. If you want to watch more of these, make sure that you're subscribed. Like the video if you enjoyed it, and that will inspire me to continue on and find more of these great whiskeys. I know my local store has been picking some really cool stuff up, so I will have some really interesting whiskeys coming up in the near future. And until next time, cheers and Slanjava.